I was an officer for the Minneapolis Police Department. This happened in the summer of 2007, and it is, without a doubt, the strangest thing I've ever encountered in my entire life. It started with some odd reports, strange sightings that most of my department was convinced was an elaborate joke. Towards the end of it, we just stopped taking down the reports when we'd get calls about it. The first call was from a college student. She was studying at a university in the area and claimed to have seen a creature on the roof of one of the buildings. The call came in on a Friday night, and when I heard the word creature, I assumed that drugs or alcohol were involved. She described a feathered birdman with glowing red eyes. I was on the phone with her at the station, and some of the other officers started listening in when I asked her to describe the creature. I asked what the birdman was doing, and it took every ounce of self-restraint I had to keep from laughing. She said the birdman was just standing there, staring at her. I asked if the birdman was doing anything illegal, and the girl hung up. In hindsight, I was definitely being a smartass, but how was I supposed to believe any of that? A birdman with glowing red eyes? We deal with a lot of drug cases, and that's the kind of story I'd get from someone on drugs, so I didn't think much of it. However, we got another call the next day. This time it was from a woman in her 40s, working the weekend shift at a mall department store. She closed up for the night and headed to her car in the parking lot, and there, standing under a lamppost, was the dark silhouette of a man with wings. And get this, he had glowing red eyes. I thought the other officers were pranking me. There was no way there was another call-in about a menacing winged man. I told them nice try and went on with the rest of my day. But it didn't end there. Not by a long shot. Over the next 2 weeks, we had numerous calls about the creature. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Sometimes it was described as having red eyes, sometimes gold or amber. All the callers said it was about 5.5 to 6 feet tall and had wings. Not a single person saw its face. Sometimes it was on a roof. Sometimes it was just standing on the ground in the shadows. No one ever saw it fly anywhere. After about the 6th call, I started to look into this as much as I could. There wasn't a whole lot to go on, and the whole thing became a joke in our department. There would be bets on if we'd get a call about the creature that day. We had wondered if maybe some new hallucinogenic drug out there was causing people to see this thing. The other theory floating around was that there was some guy dressing up as this creature and trying to scare people. That was the theory that made the most sense to me. But you'd think that with all the driving around we do at night, one of us would have seen it by now. When I couldn't find any other information, I did a quick Google search and tried to find something that matched the descriptions. There, I did find something interesting. The Mothman. Now, I really didn't believe in that stuff, but the sketches I saw of it were just like the descriptions we'd been getting. I continued my search, trying to find some reason that these creatures were all of a sudden popping up, when there'd been no evidence of them here previously. I didn't find much, but I did read that sometimes they show up just before something bad is about to happen. I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. I'm not sure exactly why, because, like I said, I don't believe in this stuff, but I couldn't shake the feeling. We continued to get in reports of this thing. That was about it. It never attacked anyone or shown any signs of aggression. It was just there. And still, none of us had yet to see one. Of course, we jokingly say we saw the birdman at a traffic stop and things like that, but it was just such an absurd thing that it was impossible not to joke about. The reports came in by the dozens during the last week of July. The creature was in the road, it was on the roof of the bank, it was in an alleyway. There was just no end to it. The reports were so numerous that we were told to search for this thing on our patrols. My superiors were convinced that it was a person or group of people playing an elaborate prank, which, to be fair, was the logical explanation. The following week, just after 6 p.m. on August 1st, The I-35 West Bridge over the Mississippi River collapsed. It was a sudden freak accident due to a fatal design flaw of the bridge. It was loaded with rush hour traffic at the time. It was bad. There were 13 total deaths, I believe, and about 150 injuries. I didn't put it together at the time, but after that, the sightings of the creature stopped altogether. I can't say exactly what the creature was, since I never saw it myself. I don't know if the thing was evil, or if it just came as a warning. I don't think anyone really knows. I do know that if I ever hear a report of one again, I'm taking my family and leaving town immediately. When I was 22 and just out of college with my early childhood education degree, I went in search of some kind of work teaching preschool. Unfortunately, all of the public Head Start and preschool programs were at capacity for teachers, so I wound up venturing into private daycare centers and preschool centers looking for jobs instead. That's how I met Deborah. Deborah ran a daycare stationed in a small strip mall downtown from where I lived. The day I went in for the interview, I noticed that the daycare center was weirdly dark. There were no outside windows, only a clear storefront-type window facing the mall corridor where the kids would play in an open play area, on full display to the mall shoppers, like puppies in the window of a pet store. Inside the center, she only had bulbs in about every other light, so the center was dimly lit at best. I admit that, at first, I wondered why anyone would bring their kids there. It didn't seem like the kind of cheery and fun environment that a parent would be looking for when they searched out a daycare center for their kids. But the pay was okay, so when she offered me the job, I figured I'd do the best I could with what I had. I started on a beautiful autumn morning. I had my yearly lesson plan all mapped out. I had purchased some new toys and games to replace the dingy old ones that were cluttered around the center in boxes and closets, and I was determined to make a change in the lives of my 20 new preschool students. We were all set to start with a nature walk around the park behind the strip mall. I was helping the kids get their jackets on when Deborah came out of her office and asked me what I was doing. I explained to her that since the weather was so nice, I thought we'd go for a walk around the park and gather leaves and twigs and rocks, and then bring them back and talk about them as part of our morning science discussion. She seemed furious. She told me that under no circumstances was I to ever take the kids outside unless she suggested it, and that, if I wanted rocks and leaves and twigs to talk about, she'd watch the kids for me, to go outside and grab a few myself. It was very strange, but I was determined to talk about how autumn changes the outdoors, so I took her up on her offer to watch the kids for a few minutes and ran outside, gathering a few things myself. During discussion time, I sat with the kids in a circle and held up some of the things I found. I'd hold something up and ask, "Did this change because of the fall?" Of course, leaves and acorns and pine cones all changed, so the answer would be yes. Twigs and rocks, though, were met with no. I then told the kids I was sorry I got their hopes up earlier about going outside, but that I, too, was just starting to learn the rules of the school, and I hoped they wouldn't be mad at me. They told me that they weren't mad, and that Miss Debbie is protecting us by keeping us inside. I thought that was a strange thing to say, but I didn't want to undermine her either. I told them that yes, sometimes things outside can be dangerous, but that we shouldn't be afraid of the outdoors. That's when they told me they needed to stay inside where it's dark and warm until their eyes were ready for the sun again. Again, it was a strange thing to say, but I just nodded and changed the subject. At nap time, all the kids laid on their sleeping cots, and I went to the front desk to work on my lesson plan for the next day. Deborah had left the books open, and I couldn't help but notice that the parents with kids there were paying at least double the tuition you'd expect from another daycare center. It was bizarre. I couldn't figure out why anyone would pay double to leave their kids in such a drab, depressing place all day, every day, while they went to work. Nevertheless, I had a job in my field, so I was choosing to be happy, even if I didn't understand the methodology behind my boss's childcare practices. I heard a stirring in the corner of the room where one kid was laid down to take a nap, and decided to go over and make sure he was okay. When I got there, he was sitting up in his cot and had a cricket pinched between two fingers. I grabbed a tissue from the box on top of the bookshelf and said, "Here, let me take that from you." He frowned at me and shook his head. That's when he said, "No, I found it, so it's mine." Then he popped it into his mouth like a piece of popcorn and proceeded to crunch away at it. 4 years of college had not prepared me for that. I was shocked and wondered what to do. Would eating a cricket make him sick? Was this some sign of a psychological trauma or some issue? I decided to play it cool and go ask Deborah in her office about what she'd suggest. I told the kid, "Sorry, I didn't mean to take him away from you. I just meant if you didn't want him, I'd take him somewhere else." The kid smiled at me and said, "That's okay, I'm going to sleep some more now." I told him that was a good idea and tucked him back into his cot. Then I stood up and made a beeline for Deb's office. When I got there, though, she wasn't expecting me. I noticed brown contact lenses in a lens case sitting on her desk. Her office was illuminated in a black light, and when she turned, startled to face me, her eyes were yellow and her pupils were slits. I didn't ask her anything. I ran to the front desk, grabbed my stuff, and left, never to return back there. It would be a while before I realized what I'd gotten myself into that day. Deborah was clearly reptilian, but not being allowed outside in the sun, eating crickets, parents paying double to keep their kids in the dark all day? The children must have been reptilian too. I worked retail the rest of that school year and was hired on to the public school district the next fall. I've been working there ever since, and morning nature walks are a part of our regular routine. I believe in hypnosis. This day and age you have to, don't you think? White line fever kind of made it a thing. It's irrefutable. That sensation you get after driving for a while, arriving at your destination, only to wonder how exactly you got there. That's a form of hypnosis. Your mind drifts away while your body stays in place, going through the motions with every measure of practiced safety. Your body shifts into autopilot. In those instances, you lose maybe 10 minutes of your time. Maybe you've got a long commute and it's 40 minutes or even an hour. There's a limit, you know? Your brain kind of checks in. It pings back into your body to make sure some muscle memory hasn't steered you off of a cliff. In those cases, it's easy to forgive the 10 minutes of time that you don't remember experiencing. I've forgotten more than 10 minutes. I've forgotten 3 days. Maybe in the span of an entire life, 3 days doesn't sound like a lot. It is for me. It wasn't a bender, and it wasn't some accident. 3 days were stolen from me. I remember driving east on I-90, crossing South Dakota. I was on the way home after spending the holiday in Montana. I was only midway through the drive. I wasn't tired yet, but I was alone on the road. My eyes were playing tricks on me, like eyes do. Every pair of headlights cresting over the horizon felt like a big deal. When they were far away and especially small, I found myself hoping I was coming upon a city. I-90 isn't much to look at. A city would have helped. It's always the light of some other bleary-eyed traveler. We passed and drifted away in anonymity. That went on for about an hour. Then a trio of blinking lights crested on the horizon, all different colors and spaced too far apart to be the front end of a car. Blinking, flashing, fading to black. I remember turning down the radio and shifting the lever that cleans my windshield. There was something wrong about those lights. They weren't just coming toward me. They were rising off the ground. They were climbing too high to be a trick of the road. 3 lights, yellow, blue, and red. They brightened and dimmed. They started to spin as if each was mounted on the edge of a giant frisbee. I remember asking under my breath just what I'd found. I remember passing underneath the lights. I remember sticking my head out the driver's side window to get a better look at the vessel above me. It was as long as 2 city buses stacked end to end. The strobe of the lights revealed a smooth black metal. There were no connected parts and no seams where the material was bound together. The shape was one solid piece. Another light came down, I think. I remember shielding my eyes from something. I remember slamming on the brakes. If it was another car on the road, there were never any reports. I remember feeling like I was falling. Then I woke up in town. I blinked and I was home. I was standing in the grocery store with a gallon of milk in my hand. I dropped the carton and it ruptured. Milk sloshed all over my shoes while I stood there in the aisle. They weren't the shoes I was wearing in the car. It was daylight out. Not the next day, I soon learned, but 3 days later. I'd arrived home on schedule, if my boss is to be believed. I showed up where I was supposed to. I spoke to my friends and family. I told everyone all about Montana and described a peaceful drive home. I know it wasn't me speaking, not really. Otherwise, I would have mentioned the lights in the sky. I lived my life as normal for those 3 days, or at least my body did. Autopilot. Auto-living. There's no point in doubting whether or not my body was here. Everyone says that it was, so who am I to argue? That didn't make it right. I saw a doctor. There were no abnormalities in my brain or in my sleeping patterns. Everything psychological was right as rain. I have a new scar, though. A vertical line down the back of my neck, running parallel to my spine. I asked for an X-ray. I've had a surgery, I guess. There's a metal plate connecting 2 of my vertebrae. I've seen the scans. I can feel it when I press my fingers against my neck. But it's not supposed to be there. There's no record of that operation. There was no auto accident. My car wasn't wrecked, and I wasn't hospitalized. If the surgery was performed over those 3 days, I wouldn't have healed already. Yet, what other explanation is there? I saw the lights, I saw the craft, and then I arrived home. I arrived home early, and I lived my life without ever realizing it. I find myself wondering what woke me up. What provoked my brain to check back in on reality in that specific moment? It was just a trip to the grocery store as far as I could tell. Or were they simply done with me? Did they finish with the body first and then spend some extra time on the mind? Did they like what they found? 3 days is a lot of time. It's a long time to spend without control. It's long enough that it's hard to imagine what my mind was doing while my bones were walking around these streets. Where was I? What was I doing? What was being done to me? I can't get the time back, I know that now. I just need someone to tell me if this is all over. I don't want to be afraid of the lights at the end of the road.